Good evening, everybody. My name is Suzann. I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of God and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I celebrated 35 years, May 13th of this year. I want to ask one thing. How many of you people are in treatment? Raise your hands. Good, you're in the right place, whether you like it or not. I have a daughter who went into treatment when she was 20 years old. And this year she celebrated 35 years of sobriety. She never had to go back out. So I know that all of you are capable of that as well. Before I was dragged into treatment, let me put it that way, I was one of those people who was in denial. And that's D-E-N-I-A-L, which means don't even know I'm lying. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. My former husband was an alcoholic. But nonetheless, that's what I achieved. That was my great achievement, is to become an alcoholic. As Dr. Paul says, the worst thing he thought he could be was an alcoholic. And I can tell you, after 35 years of sobriety, is the best thing that ever happened to me. I came from I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and this is just part of my story, because it unfolds into something different in sobriety. But I came from a very prominent Canadian family. My grandfather was head of a steel corporation and on the board of directors for 7 major corporations. So I was raised in privilege. And one of the places that he was on the board of directors was Hiram Walker. Now, if anybody knows what Hiram Walker is, that's Canadian Club and Johnny Walker Black and Red. And he also was on the board of director of 7-Up. So we had it made. But because I thought I was so privileged, I wasn't like anybody else. And we had geographic boundaries imposed on us as children. We could only associate with certain type of people from certain parts of the city. So I was confined very, very young in that world of alcoholism. They didn't call it alcoholism at that time. They just called it heavy drinking. There was a lot of heavy drinking going on in our home. A lot of secrets. And in alcoholism, there's a lot of secrets. My family would say to me, what goes on in these 4 walls stays within these 4 walls. So I became an emotional cripple because I started carrying all the family secrets. I didn't know that that's what was happening to me. I was very popular in high school, cheerleading, and even at 5'2", I played basketball, if you can imagine. I played volleyball and I was in cheerleading, so of course that made me very popular. We didn't drink in Canada. I was the first generation American, and then my father was transferred to Canada. We didn't, as I said, we didn't drink in Canada at that time. That was in the 50s. But we moved back to Detroit, Michigan. I heard the Michigander there. And I went to a high school there, and they had fraternities, and they drank, and I was like, where in the God's name have I been all my life? Now, you remember they had draft beer, and I didn't ever taste a draft beer, and I got so drunk on draft. I promised myself I'd never, ever drink that again. And I didn't. I didn't care for liquor at all. I didn't care for the taste of it until I got married. And I really liked the taste of it then. I married my, it wasn't my high school sweetheart because I only had one senior year of high school in Detroit. But I married the man, the prep guy, the guy with the saddle shoes, the pinched-in haircut, and he drove the Buick, and his father was a head of a corporation. He fit the mold perfectly. And just because he was drunk the first night I met him, I didn't think anything about it. I didn't know that he was going to become a potential alcoholic. Got married, had 4 children in 5 years, and it was the beginning of the 60s. So here I haven't really lived my life. Of course, the 50s were very calm, but the 60s were rock and roll, and anything went. Fortunately, I didn't get into the drugs except for amphetamines, and that was to keep the weight down after I had all these babies. And then you put that alcohol combined with amphetamines, and anything is possible. Who needs God, right? Anything is possible. We had the boots and the mini skirts. Didn't make any difference whether I was married and 4 children. And I remember my husband one night said to me, I'm going to fix you a drink. And he said, you may not like the way it tastes, but just sip it. And that was a martini. And I thought, how could anybody drink anything that tastes like turpentine? That's the way I thought martini. But I can guarantee you, after that first martini, I crossed over the line to alcoholism. And I was not a drinker. Alcoholism doesn't start with the amount you drink. Alcoholism starts with the effect it brings. And at that moment, he was taller, handsomer, the kids were beautiful, everything was beautiful. He came from a violently abusive home, and I was abused. Didn't make any difference. That alcohol would just stuff it down, And then we moved to upstate New York. And again, it was that same thing, the 60s and early 70s. And I got a job. And I became an interior designer. I didn't know a damn thing about it, but at least I became it. And strange things started to happen. I was introduced to a program called Al-Anon because my husband, after in a blackout, threatened to throw me out of the 4th story window of the Hilton Hotel in Toronto, he didn't remember it. So he went into AA and he introduced me to Al-Anon. And I thought the problem was his, not mine. He was the one he didn't know that I had hiding all this liquor. He had no idea, I had no concept. But he would come home and I was drunk. And then we started I'd had sherry and I'd hide the sherry. And sherry would be in the cruets, and it would be sherry in the morning, sherry in the winter, sherry at supper time, anytime I had it. He couldn't figure out what was going on with me. But also, alcohol gave me permission to have a resentment because I knew, he had been cheating on me. So, of course, I was going to have the same type of thing. That's what resentment brings, retaliation. So there was a tall, dark Italian man down at the foot of the hill. And we had this, what we call an emotional affair. And I didn't care whether I was married with 4 children. That's what alcoholism brings. You just don't give a damn. Sooner or later, it catches up with all of us. Every one of us in this room is here because you know why you're here. Next came the Mustang Convertible. 4 kids and a mother in her short skirts, and she's having a whale of a time with her Mustang Convertible. And they didn't think I was married. As soon as I put the key in that ignition, I was no more married. I was no more the mother of 4. I was living a life that my husband didn't even know existed. It was that magic Luxor alcohol and the amphetamines. He had no idea that I was into the amphetamines. You know, alcoholics and addicts lie, cheat, and steal. We do. We lie, cheat, and steal. Go to the 12 and 12 and you'll find the 7 deadly sins in there. And it means deadly, okay? They kill us. I was dead inside. I looked good in the lobby, but I was dead inside. And then we moved to Scottsdale. Perfect place for a person like myself. I then became one of the top designers in Phoenix. And the only way I could handle that was by drinking. It was like if you only knew who I was. And if you didn't know who I was, I told you who I was. That's the arrogance that alcoholism brings. That's the pride that alcoholism brings. God isn't any part of the picture. Because after all, don't you know who I am? And of course, what did I want to do? I wanted to divorce my husband. He wasn't worth keeping. He was drinking, and I was drinking. A marriage pulled together by a bottle. That's where we got. Fortunately, he divorced me. And as an alcoholic, he remarried right away. A practicing alcoholic generally marries right away because they can't stand being by themselves. I, on the other hand, went down the rabbit hole. And it was on January 13th of 1983 that I was sitting watching a movie, or it wasn't a movie, it was called The Hour magazine, and there was a singer from the 50s, and I thought he had died. It was just like he went off the radar. And the next thing I knew, he was talking about a very different thing that I never even heard before. And he said, there are 3 choices for the alcoholic: death, insanity, or recovery. And he was the vice president of the National Council of Alcoholism. So God knows he must have been quite a bit sober. And he was the vice president for 14 years. And at that moment, what I didn't understand was a power greater than myself caught me. For the moment I said, my God, is that what happened to me? Am I an alcoholic? I had been in and out of treatment in a psych ward. And the psychiatrist top in Scottsdale said, we keep getting you around this way, and the next thing you know, you're out. You can't seem to get that situation going for yourself. So I could no longer afford the psychiatrist, thank God. God became my psychiatrist. He brought me out of the depths of the alcoholism. And after that particular TV segment, which I never watched daytime television, but it was that particular time, within 5 days, the desire to drink was gone. And I ended up in treatment. And how I ended up in treatment was I went to a meeting shaking because I was detoxing. Went to a meeting, and there was a woman there who came up to my car because I couldn't stop. I couldn't start my car. At that time, I had a 78 Camaro. And at that time, you had to put your foot on the gas, so I couldn't put my foot on the gas to start the car. And she said, "You need to come with me." And of course, I said to her, "Do you know who I am?" And she said, "No." Well, I proceeded to tell her who I was. After all, don't you know who I am? I'm the top designer here in the valley, and so on and so forth. And she stood there aghast. It wasn't that she recognized who I was or my self-importance. She had been called a year prior by one of my peers that said, "I think we have an alcoholic on staff. Can you help her?" And she said, "No, she has to reach her bottom." That day she met me, I hadn't showered in 3 days. And she took me to a restaurant and fed me cheese, grilled cheese sandwiches and sugar so I could stop. And then they went to another AA group, and 7 women in a kitchen 12-stepped me and got me into treatment that night. Now, do you think I thought I was an alcoholic? Do you think I admitted I was an alcoholic? No way. I was different, terminally unique. And they said, "Anybody that doesn't think they're an alcoholic?" Up went the hand. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to learn all I can about alcoholism in 28 days. I was so arrogant and defiant that I was one of those people in a class of 50 on cancer and smoking that I lit up the cigarette in the middle of the class. That's how defiant I was. And the doctor looked down at me and he said, "Some of you will make it and some of you won't." Well, I got defiant and I thought, by God, I'm going to make it. You know, defiance can work for you or against you, one or the other. And I still wasn't quite convinced that I was an alcoholic because I wasn't that bad. I listened to these women in treatment to say all these things, and I thought I hadn't done any of this yet. And fortunately, I had a good counselor that said, "yet. You keep on drinking, sweetheart, and you're going to do the same things that these people are doing." So I got out of treatment, got my own apartment, got back into the business of designing, and I thought, oh God, I've got it made. This is powerful. You know, I was sober and had lots of friends and everything else. And then I said, "God, I want you to take everything and anything away from me that separates me from the knowledge of you. I want to know you intimately." And he did. He took it all away. My job, I was very well paid. My house, everything. And I had to live providentially. My family was appalled that I would do this, but I knew that I was on a search and an adventure. For you people with 30 and 60 days, and anyone else in this room, I can tell you, you keep sober, you will be on an adventure you would never in your wildest dreams ever imagined. You pick up a drug or a drink, you're lost, and you have shot yourself in the foot. Because you have denied yourself something that is so powerful, that has kept me sober for 35 years. And that is a relationship with God. I have a big book here. This is my 4th big book. And it's falling apart. And the reason it's falling apart is because I'm not. When your big book is falling apart, you're not. Do you get it? And your big book is falling apart. You're not. On page 45 in the big book, I love this page, and it's called We Agnostics, because I came in agnostic. I knew there was a God, but I had no idea about a relationship with God, nor did I care to have one either. And it talks here about to be doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. And we were hoping against hope that we were not alcoholics. After a while, we faced the fact that we must find spiritual basis of life, dash, or else. That's just what I've said. We had wished for all moral convictions and wished philosophical comforted. In fact, we could really will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were you going to find this power? Well, it tells you that this book will show you that. And this book says specifically. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Okay, now what I'm telling you, when I came from this very prominent family, and I thought designing was my career, but on page 68 in the big book is the fear inventory. And on the 14th line down is the most beautiful sentence for me in the big book. We are in the world with a role that He assigns. And makes all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world. Because I had to learn to live in this manner that was so against everything that I was brought up with. I moved 32 times. And I've never found it necessary to pick up a drink. But I can guarantee you, 12 moves in 1 year. I can guarantee you every single move I went to, there was God. There was a piece of the puzzle. That was the adventure. So what did I come to do? I came to trust this power so far greater than myself. And today, it's like that where Kathy was mentioning the dash in the first step, that our lives had become unmanageable. My life is unmanageable when I try to manage it. My life is manageable when I let this power so far greater than myself manage it. I have a life I could never in my wildest dreams imagine. From a designer, I was gifted with a talent of architecture. From living in corners of living rooms, living in hallways, living in places that look like Tobacco Road, I had no idea that these were all stepping stones to this life that was waiting for me. And when the gift came to do the architecture, it was because I was sober. And I was also abstinent from sugar and flour. A lot of people will do the substitute method. Get off the alcohol, get off the drugs, get on the other stuff, whatever it is. People, places, and things. Relationships. Oh God, that's a big one for all of us. Relationships. Until I could develop a relationship, solid relationship, with this power greater than myself. I used everybody. That's what we do. We use people. We use them up. They use us up. But when that relationship was developed, and continues to be developed, I was given a project from an international client that I could never, in my wildest dreams, ever imagine. That's where sobriety takes us. Just putting a cork in the bottle isn't where it's at. There has to be more than just putting a cork in a bottle or putting down the needle. I have a granddaughter who served time for heroin. I know what I'm talking about. I worked with kids all over Phoenix area that were in treatment centers and in rehabilitation centers and lockup units. I have worked in that field and helped them. I don't know who was helped more, they or me. But I love young people because you're the lifeblood of this program. Without you, what do we got? Each and every one of you are so special because I can guarantee you God is at this AA meeting. And each and every one of you, there is that wonderful idea of God. Somebody had to create you. And why not allow that Creator to bring you a life so far beyond your imaginings? When I sat down to do this work, I started in 1992. I had no idea who it was for, but I just followed the next step. That's what we're all taught. What's the next right step? That's all you have. I only have 24 hours. I don't have a future. Yesterday is history, and tomorrow's a mystery. I get up in the morning, I get on my knees, I thank God for another day of sobriety and abstinence. And I turn my agenda over to Him. I give my thoughts and my words and my actions. When I sit down to do my work, and I still do my work, and you get to look this good at 83 years old. That's what I am. I'm 83 years old. I do the treadmill, I work with I work with machines, I do all kinds of things. Sobriety has so much to offer you, but you have to take it. You have to be willing to go to any lengths to keep the gift that God has given you. You know, your family, all of your families, my family, look at me in an entirely different light. Because they knew this mother that was a wild woman. Today they know that they can depend on me not to pick up a drink. Because I sure as God name, I do not want to get this gift away. The only way I can give it away is to help another alcoholic. Working with the young people, working with the young people, especially on the reservation. When I moved to Arizona and lived in Scottsdale, at that time, back in '75, there was the Pima Reservation on that side of the road, and I was so frightened of Native Americans because I hadn't been around Native Americans. Well, God had His last say. I got news for you. Every week for a year, I traveled from the Carefree area down to Saskatoon and worked with the Native American, the Pima Indians. Isn't that a great? It was something I was as frightened about is something that I became so accepting of, and they accepted me. It was my privilege to work with them. And they would sit there, I was just sharing somebody before the meeting, they would sit there and they would watch these soap operas. Well, that's a joke. Anybody that watches soap opera is a joke. It's all make-believe. And I said to them, your tribe is inherent with art, and I'm an artist. And if I go and beg and get you the supplies and the instruction manuals, will you do art? And I would go to the AA meetings in Scottsdale and say, H&I, we need help. And I would bring these supplies to these young people in Saskatoon. I wish you could see the art that came out of these young people. Outstanding, outstanding. Poetry, whatever. They were marvelous. They were wonderful, wonderful children. Young people. And some of them were children. There was one girl who had been on the street since she was 3 years old and became very endeared with me and I with her. Now, this was not the way I was brought up. I was socially stagnant. Alcoholics Anonymous and what other anonymous program may belong to has gold. But you got to dig for it. And the only way you can dig for it are these 12 steps. You people are so fortunate to be so young to be given this program and have this life that I hand out to you that was so graciously given to me because I had the willingness to be willing not to pick up that first drink. I had to be willing to work with that next alcoholic. I'm willing to be willing at my age to keep sponsoring. Every one of you people are precious to me. You have no idea how grateful I am that I could stand at this podium and look out at the faces that are looking towards me and know that every one of you are capable of becoming and staying sober. Make your parents proud. I worked with the eating disorder at a place that's no longer existing, but I worked 3 meetings a week with those girls. And they were heroin addicts, alcoholics, and had food problems. And that was when I was 80. Keeps me young. I can guarantee you, I know I don't look like 80. And God knows I don't act like 80. Because my heart is young. I need you, and you need me, whether you like it or not. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be of maximum service to God and to you. Thank you.